wonderful morning.
Well, good morning again. I hope you had a good time worshiping with Kevin and Diane this morning. It was exciting to see Diane and Kevin singing together again. Thanks for doing that for us. And we're going to get right into our passage this morning. We're going to be in Romans chapter 3, verses 21 through 23. And yes, that is only 3 verses, but they're so rich that I really had to kind of cut down today. I was planning on doing about 11 verses, and it was going to take us, 3 or 4 hours. I was going to keep you guys here, so I decided to narrow it down this morning just to these few verses. We're actually starting on something that I've been anticipating for weeks and longer, really, since we started Romans. This kind of hinge point, this transition point from a lot of this ugliness we've been seeing as we've been looking at human depravity for the past couple of chapters. We're transitioning into some really good news. And in fact, this paragraph that we're going to be looking at, a guy named Leon Morris, who's just a theologian, has written a number of commentaries. It's really good. He actually says this may be the most important single paragraph ever written. Which is pretty high praise. If you think about everything that's ever been written in all of time, that he would say that this paragraph is the most important paragraph ever written is pretty high praise. And I don't know that I 100% agree with him, but it's definitely got to be in the top 10. It's an amazing section of Scripture that we get to look at today. So let me pray for us, and we'll get right into what we're doing. Lord, just thank you that we can be together this morning. Thank you that we can be together, fellowshipping together in these homes, and that we can continue to do this thing we're doing as a church, even in the midst of difficulty and in the midst of discomfort and having to change things up and get creative with things, that we can still be together and meet together and open your word together. I just pray that you would use these truths this morning in our lives. That you would help me just to lay them out, not to try to convince anyone of anything or push anything, but just lay out the truths that are there. And so I just want to depend on your Spirit this morning to guide me through this and guide us through this. Pray this all in your name. Amen. So starting in verse 21 of chapter 3, it starts like this. It starts with these words that I actually mentioned a number of weeks ago when I was trying to say good stuff is coming. It starts with these words, but now. If you remember a couple weeks ago, I actually showed kind of this picture of my Bible software that I had highlighted the words, but now. I've been thinking about these words for weeks as we've been talking about this other stuff. Because really for a while now, Paul has been creating kind of this case against us. This case against our morality, our goodness, our trying to live our lives on our own apart from God. And he started way back in chapter 1, verse 18, and said the wrath of God is being revealed, that God is angry with us, that he looks at our behavior and our ungodliness and our unrighteousness, and he's so angry with it because we're so ungodly, we are so unrighteous, and so he's revealing his wrath. He's pouring out his anger and his wrath against the depravity that drove the Nazis in Germany, that drove the Hutus in Rwanda, that drove the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, these people that just mass murdered millions and millions and millions of people. And I could go on with a long list of these atrocities over time. He's angry at the depravity that rationalizes abuse and rape and child pornography and these things that that we hate, that we look at and we get angry about. We want justice about. He's angry at that. And he's doing something about it. He's pouring out his anger on humanity because of our depravity. And then he says, but now. That's all true, but now. He went on and he continued to address the problem with us as humans, that we've suppressed the truth in unrighteousness, that we didn't honor God. Even though we knew God, we didn't honor God. We didn't give thanks to God. We exchanged his thoughts, his thinking for speculations, for futile speculations. Because we didn't want him, we had to create something else to replace it. Professing to be wise, we think we're pretty smart, but we're really, really fools. And we exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God, the eternal God, for the form of corruptible man, temporary things. Think about that, the eternal glory of God, and we just kind of threw that away for temporary stuff that is around us that we began to worship. And not only that, but we exchanged the truth of God for a lie. We decided to ignore the truth and just start lying to ourselves about what's real. And you can see some of those lies very, very clearly in our society, but some of those lies are a little more subtle than that. But we've just been lying to ourselves. Because we're like, I don't want God's truth. I don't want what he's giving me, so I got to create something else. I got to tell myself something else. And so we get really comfortable with telling ourselves these lies. And we end up serving created things rather than the Creator. And all of that makes us people who are without excuse. We don't have an excuse for our behavior. There's no defense for who we are and what we are and the depravity that lives in us. And then he says, but now. But now. He went on, he talked about the fact that in God's anger, he gave us over to the lusts of our hearts, gave humans over to the lusts of our hearts, that our bodies would be dishonored, that we would be doing shameful things with our bodies, that he gave us over to degrading passions, shameful passions, these things that we just had to have. And we exchanged natural things for unnatural things and committed indecent acts with one another because of that. And he gave us over to depraved minds. Our thinking becomes more and more and more twisted. And that results with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, gossip, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil. Just this long list that could go on and on and on and on, filled with how just wrong we are. And because of all of that, you and I, everyone on the planet, we are worthy of death. That's what we deserve. That's the only thing we're worthy of is death. But now, do you see the goodness of these words? I love these words. You add to that the fact that those of us who started passing judgment on the others, we're like, yeah, they're bad, I'm good. And in passing judgment on others and their behavior, we're actually condemning ourselves. And the reason for that is we practice the same kinds of things. Yeah, to a different degree or in a little different way. And so we justify ourselves and we think we're better than others when we're really not, because we're just doing the same kind of things. And because of that, God's judgment, the judgment of God, rightly falls upon us. We will be judged for all this. And in fact, we are storing up God's wrath for the day of judgment, when God will reveal his righteous judgment upon us. So maybe we don't see God pouring out our wrath in our day-to-day lives, but our wrath is being stored up against us. And that should be a really, really scary thought, to us, because the God of the universe is angry with us and storing up punishment for us. And then he says, but now. You add to that that there's no partiality with God. That those who sinned without the law are going to perish without the law, without the Bible, without God's truth. And all who have sinned under God's truth will be judged by God's truth. None of us are going to escape, whether you have the Bible or you don't have the Bible, whether you know what's in there or you don't know what's in there. Either you're going to die not knowing what's in there and perish because you're going to be judged for the things that you've done, or you're going to know what's in there and you're going to perish because you've been disobeying the things that are in there. There's no escape here. And not only will we be judged for the things we do, but God will judge the secrets of men. That the things that no one else knows, we're also going to be judged for those secret sins that we try to hide and push away. And that because we know the Bible, we tend to want to hide them and push them away because we know they're against the standards that we've set up for ourselves in the Bible, that He's set up for us. And whether we bear the name Jew, or translate it to our time, we bear the name Christian, or a moral person, or a religious person. It doesn't matter what name you bear, what group you associate with. Whether you rely upon the law and say, hey, the law is good, the Bible is good, or ethics are good, or whatever standard you hold to, you say that's good, and I believe in it, and I want to follow it, and I want to hold to it. That it doesn't matter. If we are those who know and approve of His will, we think God's law is pretty good. His ethics are pretty good, and we become confident in our knowledge of that. Probably overconfident in our knowledge of that. We teach the Bible. We preach the Bible. Does not matter, because will He not judge you and me? He's talking to us, who though having the letter of the law and circumcision, you're part of the people of God, are a transgressor of the law. Will He not judge us who have God's truth, who have God's instructions on how to live life and do life well, but we fail to keep these things that God has called us to? Will He not judge us? And it's a rhetorical question. He's saying He will judge us. And then he says, but now. Yes. To top it all off, he goes through this list, and this is right before our passage today. He says, there's none righteous. There's none who understands. There's none who seeks after God. If you think you're one of those people, you're wrong. There's none who does good. There's not even one who does good. There's no fear of God before their eyes. You on your own apart from Christ, me on my own apart from Christ, we are an absolute wreck. And it's because we don't really care about what God wants. We don't really fear His judgment. We don't really fear the enormity of who He is. And we think because we just do some good things, that we do some good things and some bad things, that somehow that's going to get us out. But we don't even understand that the instructions that God has given us, the laws in which He has set up and said, do this and don't do that, do this and don't do that, do this and don't do that, were never meant to make us acceptable before God, because we are failures at being acceptable before God. And He's going to talk about that here in a second. But He says, by works of the law, no flesh will be justified. No human being is going to be justified by doing what God tells them to do. It's just not going to happen. And not because the law is some sort of a problem. He'll talk about this later. It's because we're the problem. It's not because God's truth is somehow inadequate. It's because we are inadequate. So we won't be justified by doing good. We won't be acceptable before God by doing good. And the reason why the law exists is to give us the knowledge of sin. It's to show us how helpless we are and how depraved we are. The point of God's instruction book is to show us how inadequate we are. And we have to become convinced of that in order to really understand. But now. Yes, all of that stuff is there, and it's true, and it's real. It's like a game show. I'm gonna use this as an example a little bit today. It's like a game show, and you have door number 1. That was all door number 1, which was us trying to put our best foot forward to please God, to try to follow His rules, to try to follow our own rules, to try to follow our own ethics, to try to understand God's ethics and follow them, and maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to get what's behind door number 1. But the game that we play to get to door number 1 is simply a game we can't win. We lose. We've already lost. And we just continue to lose and lose and lose and lose at that game. But now the good news is there is a door number 2. That is a completely different game than door number 1. And this is what he says. He says, but now, apart from the law, apart from trying to please God by doing the right kinds of things for God, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been manifested. Door number 1 is there, but now there is really, truly a door number 2. There's a game number 2. There's a completely separate way to live life, a completely separate way to achieve intimacy with God and a relationship with God. And it has nothing to do with the law. It has nothing to do with trying to be and do good things. That's that losing game that we've lost 100 times over. But there's actually a way to be right with God and do right by God. This righteousness of God, it's been revealed. It's been manifested. The curtain has been pulled back on this new way. And it's actually not a new way. It's a very, very old way. We'll see that as we go a little bit farther into Romans. But he's pulling it back and saying, this is the way. This is the way to go. That way, that old way of the letter of the law, where you're just trying in your best efforts to please God and follow His rules, it's failure time. It's a game you can't win. But there's a game that can be won. That game of human achievement, of you trying to be good and you trying to be moral, has shown itself to be an absolute failure. Not only has he told us it's an absolute failure, but we can just look in our own lives and say, yeah, it's been an absolute failure. That way is the way of humans for all history. It's actually every other religion, every man-made religion in our world and that has ever existed in our world has been trying to play that performance game. They make up some sort of a standard of behavior. Like, do this and don't do that, and do this and don't do that. And each religion kind of has its new set of do's and don'ts. And this is how you can perform. This is how you can reach inner enlightenment. This is how, like, just follow the path. Just do it. And if you do it well enough, if your performance record shows up well enough, then you'll reach God. You'll reach intimacy and the pinnacleness of humanness. You'll reach whatever this God is that you're pursuing. You'll reach it, but you just have to fill out that performance review, and it's gotta measure up. And unfortunately, that way of thinking has seeped into the church over the years. This is something that we typically call like legalism, Christian legalism, or moralism. And it's this idea that, just give me the rules and I'll follow them. Just tell me what the rules are. You got, list them out. Do. What are the rules? Tell me more rules. How am I supposed to live my life? And I'm just going to, in my own strength, try to follow those rules. And that's what's going to make me pleasing to God. That's what's going to make me pleasing to my community that I'm in. And usually, if you've been around this sort of life, this sort of pursuit, or maybe you've even walked this pursuit at times, it ends up in really usually two things. It ends up in a real facade that being put on, a real fakeness being put on, because you know that you're failing at this pursuit of following these rules, and so you put on a mask to hide all the failure. So it's usually a pretty fake form of Christianity and the Christian religion. It's very fake, and it also usually ends up in standing in judgment on other people, because I'm following the rules better than you're following the rules. Yeah, I'm not following all the rules, but I'm following most of the rules. My performance review is better than your performance review. And the problem is that game is a losing game. You'll lose it. And if maybe you've been in that place or are in that place now and you have not become convinced up to this point that is a losing game, please go back to the last two chapters and allow God's Spirit to convince you that it's a losing game. And instead, choose door number 2. This different game that exists, that's been revealed, that's been manifested, that the curtain's been pulled back on. And it's not a new idea. In fact, it was being witnessed by the law and the prophets. What he's saying by that, it's kind of weirdly stated there, the thrust of this verb, but it's basically that the law and the prophets were witnesses of this. Like they were testifying in court. They were testifying that this way existed, and this way was going to happen. And so the Old Testament foreshadowed it. It pointed to it. It prepared for it. We'll talk about what the it is here in a second. But the point on your handout, if you've got the handout this morning, is this. God has revealed a way to be all right with him that is not based on our own efforts to be and do right. God has revealed a way to be all right with him that is not based on our own efforts to be and do right. Because as we've talked about, that is a losing game, that pursuit. He goes on and he describes in a very brief form what this new way is, what this other game is. He says, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. This game, this other game, is the game of faith. It's won through faith. Now, that word faith sometimes it gets misunderstood, and it's used in different ways in our society that kind of cloud the issue. You know, people talk about the Catholic faith or the Mormon faith or the Buddhist faith, or, you know, like it's some sort of religious system or whatever. That's not at all what he's talking about here. Faith is trusting in another entity, trusting in another person, trusting in something outside of yourself. That's what faith is. And so this game, this new game with door number 2, is a game in which we don't step up to the podium to play the game. You know, there's some sort of buzzer or something. You know, if you watch game shows, there's some sort of buzzer up there. Like, we don't step up to the buzzer. We don't step up to play this game. We step back and we allow another to play the game. We allow another to play the game on our behalf. And who's playing the game for us? It's Jesus Christ. It's Jesus Christ. He steps up and plays the game. And he is an expert at this game. In fact, he cannot lose. And he's not playing for himself. He's playing for me. He's playing for us. But it does require something of us. See, faith is one of those things that there is something involved there. It's not just putting our car in neutral. We actually have to step back in order for him to step up. We have to lay aside our righteousness, our self-righteousness, our human righteousness. We have to lay aside our best efforts at pleasing God and trying to win him over. We've got to let that all go and recognize our complete and utter depravity. That's why the last two chapters have been so important. That it was ugly to look through, but when I gave that illustration of like the bricks and stuff, I think that's a really apt illustration. We have to have those foundational bricks in place in order to be able to enact this faith thing. Because faith is taking all of our work and throwing it in the trash, taking all of our efforts, all of our goodness, and throwing it into the trash. And all of that's really perceived goodness anyway. It's not really good according to what God would say is good. But all of our righteousness being filthy rags, that's what they are, viewing them that way, setting them aside. Considering those things loss. If you remember Paul speaking about that, he listed all of his righteousness, all these really good things that he had been and done in his life. He's like, I consider all loss, all just junk in the junk pile, all dung in the dung heap. Like you got to toss all that stuff away. Step back and let him play the game. That's what faith is about. Trusting in his ability to win at the righteousness game. And if you're still wondering, why do I have to let someone outside of myself play this game? Why can't I step up and play that game? Because that's actually door number one. You playing the game is door number one. And we know how that ends up. It's emptiness. It's failure. This guy, Martin Lloyd Jones, who was a pastor in the early 20th century, can't speak, 20th century, he said this. I really like this quote. He just sums this up really well. He says, the man who has faith is the man who is no longer looking at himself and no longer looking to himself. He no longer looks at anything he once was. He does not look at what he is now. He does not look at what he hopes to be. He looks entirely to the Lord Jesus Christ and his finished work, and he rests in that alone. Isn't that good? We don't look to ourselves. We don't look to what we might be someday. That's the act of faith, is kind of divesting our confidence in ourselves, recognizing how untrustworthy we are, and then placing our faith, placing our trust in the one who is completely and utterly trustworthy. Point on your handout if you want to fill it out is this. It says God's way is based on mistrusting our efforts on God's behalf and trusting in Jesus' efforts on our behalf. God's way is based on mistrusting our efforts on God's behalf and trusting in Jesus' efforts on our behalf. I want to take a little break here for a second and ask this question, leave you guys with this question to discuss in your group for a little while. I'll time it for about 5 minutes or so. Hopefully that'll give you a good chance for discussion. But here's the question, and I'll put it up on the screen here in a second. Do you think it's hard for people to stop trusting in their own goodness or their own abilities or their own inner strength? Do you think it's hard for people to stop trusting in themselves? And if so, why do you think that is? Is it hard for us to stop trusting in our own goodness? Even as believers, is it hard for us to stop trusting in our own abilities and our own inner strength and our own ability to please God? Is it hard to let that go? And if so, why do you think that is? I'll give you a chance to discuss that for a little bit. All right, I hope you had a good time discussing that. If you didn't quite get finished, we're going to cover this last verse, and then you'll have more time to discuss if you'd like to pick up that conversation again. He ends our section for today, our last verse for today, with this. He says, "For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." The great news is all of everyone, every human being that's ever lived or that ever will live or that's living today, every one of us has this opportunity of faith. And he says why we all have this opportunity of faith is because every single one of us has lost that door number one, that game number one. We've lost 100 times over and more. And so we all stand on this equal ground of complete and utter failure, which gives us the opportunity to really look at ourselves and say, I don't have anything to offer here. My life has proven that I'm not as good as I think I am, that my ability to please God is I have no ability to please God. So now I need to trust in something outside of myself. I need to trust in someone outside of myself. We all have that opportunity, because all of us have both sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Those are two key concepts and good concepts. All of us have sinned. That's the tense of that verb, the force of that verb is a completed action in the past. So it's we've all in the past chosen to sin. Made choices in our lives, multiple choices, but particularly you can just look at one choice, any one choice in your life, and we've chosen to go our own way. We've chosen to reject God's perfect standard and choose a standard of our own. And this is one of those universal truths. Literally, you can ask anybody on the planet, and pretty much, unless they're extremely deluded, they're going to say, you go, hey, have you lived a perfect life? Have you never failed? Have you never done something that you shouldn't have done? And every single person is going to go, no, yeah, I've done something I should have done. The truth rings out, right? This is a self-evident truth. We know that every single one of us has sinned, and not just once and not just twice, but hundreds of times. We failed at that. And also, we fall short of the glory of God. I love this verb because it's multifaceted. The first thing to know is that it's in the present tense, which means it's kind of an ongoing action. It's an ongoing reality for us that we are those who fall short. There's different ways that you could actually translate this, but there's different ways you can look at it. One way to view it is we're too short, which to that I go, yes, I've been told that my whole life. I'm 5'6". Yeah, I'm too short. But the idea is that God's glory, which by the way, glory means the essence and the greatness of something. So the essence and the greatness of who God is, that it's like that standard of who he is up on such a high shelf, and we are just too short. We cannot reach it. We cannot attain to it because we're so short. And it's just a real reality for us. It could also mean to be in short supply of something. So in this context, we're in short supply of the character and the actions of God, the goodness of God's dealings and doings in the world. We've failed. We're failures at reflecting God's glory. And you might say, well, yeah, that's just kind of reality, and that's okay. I mean, I'm just human. But what we forget when we say things like that is we were created to reveal the glory of God. We were created in his image for the purpose of being a reflection of who he is, a reflection of his greatness and his majesty and his glory. The whole reason why we were created, the whole function in which we were supposed to serve on this planet was to reveal his glory. And we failed at doing that. Is there anything more that we could say to that? Any other excuse we could give for that? We weren't created for anything but to reveal his glory, and we have become utter failures at revealing his glory. And we live in a state of not being able to attain to his glory. That's just every person has lived in that state, that we just cannot reveal his glory or reflect his glory, even though that's what we were created for. Now that does change for us as believers. I'm just hinting at that. We're going to get there. But every human has become an utter failure and fallen short of his glory. The other way you can translate it, and this is probably my favorite way to think about this concept, is it's to be needy. We're needy of this glory, of this revelation of the glory of God in us, in reflecting this glory. We're just in a state of need. And I love that, because that's how we should live. That's how faith can even occur, is when we think we don't have need, is the moment we can't trust him. When we think we've got this buttoned up and we can handle this thing and we can do this thing, is the moment we don't need him. And that is the opposite of faith. But if we are untrustworthy, and we are, then our only response can be to trust in someone who is trustworthy. If we are unfaithful, and we are, the only thing we can do is trust in one who is completely faithful. If we are unrighteous, just not right in any real sense of the word of right, then we need to be able to trust in the one who is completely righteous, who's completely right. And any ideas of trying to reform ourselves just go out the window, because we live in this state of fallen shortness. We just can't attain to it on our own. We're just too short. What's the biggest lie of humanism? And if you don't know what humanism is, it's fine. I'll explain the basic concept and you'll be like, oh yeah, I see that everywhere. Humanism is all over our society and our world. It's the idea that just given the right amount of time, with the right education and the right resources, that we could reach the greatness of human potential. We could be everything a human was created to be. It's such a lie. I can't do anything to reach that potential. And when you challenge someone on this idea, and you say, how can you think that we're going to reach human potential? Look at all of human history. Look at your own life, your own past. How can you think that somehow we're going to reach some sort of pinnacle of humanness? And the best lies that are out there are the lies that can't be proven, right? And humanism has a really great lie out there because it cannot be proven, because it's always about the next thing. It's the next class and learning what I need to learn in that class that's going to help me reach the pinnacle. It's the next election that's going to put the right pieces in place for us to become all that we can be as a society. It's the next technological breakthrough that's going to happen that's going to allow us to reach all the potential that we have as human beings. It's always the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it's such a lie. Because you can't prove it wrong, because what if it could be the next thing, right? Well, I just think you need to look back at history and all of the human potential that existed there, human potential, and their dreams of becoming better and better and better and better, and look at where we are and where we have been and the failures of humanity. And humanism has to be a ludicrous idea, because it really is. We like it. We like to think we're stronger than what we are. We like to think we're taller than what we are. We like to think that we can reach for the stars, because it makes us feel better about our potential. And unfortunately, our potential is marked with sin and failure in the past, and we're all short of the true potential of the human, which is the revelation of the glory of God. We can't do it on our own. So the answer is stop playing game number 1 and start trusting Jesus to play the game for us. The point of your handout, if you want to fill it in, is our efforts to do right have utterly failed and revealed our complete inability to glorify God. Our efforts to do right have utterly failed and revealed our complete inability to glorify God. Let's just read together the bottom of the handout, the summary here. It says, the diagnosis is in. We are weak. We are frail. We have shown ourselves sinners time and time again. This reveals an underlying condition of our hearts that makes us incapable in ourselves of being the image bearers that we were created to be. This has fundamentally locked us out of any sort of proper relationship with God. The good news is that there is another way. It has nothing to do with us and everything to do with Jesus. When we lay down our futile efforts for God and trust in Jesus' fully effective efforts on our behalf, we become right apart from doing right. Let me just repeat that last phrase. We become right apart from doing right. What a great plan. What a great plan. What a great but now. What a great new thing to be revealed for us. Thank you, Lord. Let me pray for us. Lord, we are just so thankful for your plan. We are so thankful that you don't leave us to our own devices, because we have seen what that does. We've seen our inadequacy. We've seen our inability to do anything of real worth and pleasure for you, to our complete inability to glorify you within our lives and through our lives and reflect your glory, which is the reason why you put us on this earth. So thank you for this new way that's really, really a very, very, very old way of faith, of trusting in your Son. Help us deconstruct our own righteousness so we can fully and completely trust in his righteousness. Pray this all in your name. Amen. We're going to end today just with this final question, and I'll put it up on the screen as you guys end today. Just a way to discuss, a question to discuss, a couple questions to discuss in your groups. And then once you're done discussing, we'll be done. The broadcast will have ended at that point, and we'll be done for the morning. Question's this. In a culture that preaches the innate goodness of every person, how can we help others understand their sinfulness? And then an added question that is, do you think that's important for others? Do you think that's important for us? Do you think it's important for people to understand their sinfulness? Let you guys discuss that, and have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday.